Greed Island is one of the most overlooked arcs in Hunter x Hunter. Some people even hate it, some people even skip it. But in this video, I'm going to prove to you how it is actually one of the most important arcs in the series and how it was originally intended to be a training ground for the Dark Continent. To start things off, we know that the survival rate for humans in the Dark Continent is just 0.04%, which means almost everyone who goes there will die or end up being consumed by someone else in the region. If we had to summarize what makes the Dark Continent such a challenge for the humans of the Hunter x Hunter world, this would be it. Pretty much no one survives, and those who survive experience PTSD or other severe injuries. But what if there was a way to shift the odds in our favor? Could Greed Island provide the answer to overcoming this seemingly insurmountable challenge? Well, the answer might have been shown to us in the Greed Island arc, and what I'm talking about is the SS card, Angel's Breath. With this card being well known even by those who never played the game, and it being such a hotly contested card inside the game, we can't help but wonder if this ability at some point was more than just a card inside a game. What if Greed Island, with its intricate maze of nan-abilities and technologies, served as a testing ground for a powerful healing ability intended for use in the treacherous lands of the Dark Continent? The Greed Island game was created on an island. Now, the non-users that would decide to recreate Greed Island could have its effects work at a certain plot of land in the Dark Continent until it was fully explored. Of course, Greed Island would not have to be recreated one-on-one, but if the same system could be applied to just use Angel's Breath or a variation of it to keep people alive, the expedition's success rate would increase exponentially. Also, Angel's Breath isn't the only card that coincidentally makes people think, oh wow, that would be so useful in the Dark Continent. Cards like Trace allows people to never go missing, as you'll know exactly where they are. Ruler's Blessing, it's another card, and what's interesting about this 0/0 card is that it states its residents will leave according to whatever laws and commands you issue. Now, we do not know how far these laws and commands can manipulate reality, but what if the ruler can change how its residents can leave and die in a plot of land in the Dark Continent? Could this ruler decide to make Angel's Blessing or Trace easier to access and use? Could the ruler make situational laws and commands that would help the expedition face certain calamities? I don't know, but another card is Recycling Room. And if you found a broken artifact in the Dark Continent, you can just place it here to restore it. Hypothetical TV. Now, this card basically shows you a 30-hour documentary of all the different possibilities, sort of like Doctor Strange style. Now, imagine how handy this would be if you faced a new calamity that was never heard of before. With Return and Origin, if things are getting too difficult, you can just teleport away. With Contact, we know that communication and finding easier ways to do it is how we've been able to create more elaborate and complex civilizations. But with this NAN system, we'll have a way for the members to speak to each other, which is very crucial in the Dark Continent. Now, there are many more examples and a lot of other cards, but there is a clear connection between these to the point where they seem a little too well designed for the Dark Continent. Now, my next point involves Ging, the man himself. But first, let me ask you a question. Do you really believe Ging made Greed Island just to train his son? Come on now, we're talking about a deadbeat dad that completely abandoned his child and left him in care of his cousin. I'm not saying Greed Island was not designed to train Gon, but it was also for a much bigger reason. Ging has been dreaming of exploring the Dark Continent. Ging creating Greed Island as a project to make the Dark Continent expeditions more successful makes more sense. Ging is also on his way to the Dark Continent, or close to it, and the reason he may have been invited, other than him being one of the strongest hunters alive, would be to provide his Greed Island abilities and technologies. A spammable Angel's Blessing and the use of many other cards could be enough to make world leaders much more comfortable with letting this expedition go through. Another reason why I think this theory is true is because it just fits. If the narrator has spoken in length about anything in the series, it is that humanity is the most dangerous creature to exist. Letting the Dark Continent be the one thing humanity can't beat would not fit this message. Greed Island could be considered the poor man's Rose of the Dark Continent storyline, which is the perfect analogy. Having humanity humanity conquer that land, just how they did with Poor Man's Rose, just thematically makes sense with the message that the narrator has been trying to push. Yes, the Dark Continent is scary, but imagine if humans could just decide to activate one of its calamities with a playing card. Now that is way more terrifying. Togashi loves to mix the lighthearted with the darker elements of Hunter x Hunter. He loves to experiment with the tone of the story, and making something as lighthearted as Grid Island be a project for expeditioners would be something that this author would do. Now, if this theory were to be true, we would never watch Grid Island the same way again. Even the Grid Island haters would disappear. Now, for my last point, I think this would be a great way of reintroducing Gon in the series. There are many theories as how Gon will come back to the series, and his association to Grid Island is one of them. Now, if this theory were to be true, not only does it present more avenues for Gon to come back naturally to the story, but as the audience, we are already used to Gon taking on storylines like this. For some, the story seems too dark for Gon to come back, but if Grid Island will play a huge part into the Dark Continent arcs, it's hard to not see Gon involved in one way or another. I mean, he was the only person who won the game. If we even look at the design of Grid Island itself, it's sort of like a parody of what the Dark Continent would be like from a combat standpoint primarily. One of the main points of Grid Island is that you typically don't know what abilities your opponent has, or if you do, your knowledge is very limited. Gon being able to overcome Genthru, an indirect calamity, and Razor, an intended one, to beat Grid Island would be used as an example of how the Dark Continent can be overcome by playing into everyone's strengths and being smart with what you have. This would also explain why Ging is quite fixated on having allies around, despite being primarily a lone wolf. We already have a precedent set for Freak's family members inheriting knowledge about the Dark Continent from their ancestors, like how Ging uses the scrolls obtained by Don Freaks' journey to prepare himself for his own expedition. In his meetup with Gon on top of the tree, I got the sense that Ging felt motivated to make this extraordinary journey, not just so he could see something that wasn't in front of him, but also to find his long-lost family member. It gave me chills when I realized that this is exactly the same motivation Ging has given to Gon by leaving. Even from this writing perspective, Gon and Grid Island would become a perfect parallel to Ging and the Dark Continent. Both paths go in with the purpose of conquering it as a result of curiosity and family ties. It would be the ultimate like father like son format for the series. I think it is totally plausible for Ging to have made Grid Island for Gon to get stronger, but also for humanity to establish safer exploration protocols in the Dark Continent. We could even say that Ging created this specific training ground for Gon so he could practice thinking like a Dark Continent explorer, just so he could be ready for it in the future. Finally, if the Dark Continent goes through, it could definitely be a very high quality arc that few anime would ever have reached. I really hope it can be completed properly, since there's just so much to explore from world building to character interactions and development. I also just really want this theory to be true, because it would be a thematic and writing masterpiece that brings everything full circle. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like, and if you have any more thoughts related to this theory, please feel free to comment down below. Until next time.